friends, and welcome to episode 120 of Did You Bring the Hummus podcast. I'm Kimberly, your host, and I am super excited to be here with you today. Did You Bring the Hummus is a podcast for all things vegan. Episodes post every Monday on your favorite podcast app. Before we get started, I have one very important question for you. Did you bring the hummus? Visit my website to learn more about how to support the podcast, sign up for a meditation session, and everything else I'm up to. I've also joined forces with Jennifer Shlomovich of The Confident Vegan to bring you the next great thing in morning TV, That Vegan Morning Show, which airs on YouTube every Monday at 7 a.m. Eastern. Join our mailing list and get a free recipe ebook of some of our favorites. Today, I am joined by philosopher and author of new book, Hungry Beautiful Animals, Matthew Halteman. Matt is a professor of philosophy at Calvin University in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and a fellow at the Oxford Center for Animal Ethics in the UK. He is the author of Compassionate Eating as Care of Creation and co-editor of Philosophy Comes to Dinner, Arguments about the Ethics of Eating. His book, Hungry Beautiful Animals, of which we talk a lot about, is a heartfelt, humane, and humorous exploration of how going vegan can bring abundance into our lives. This is such a rich conversation of veganism, morality, abundance, leading with love, and the parallels we observe in the state of our world right now. Matt and I dig in deep with a lot of care, love, and laughs. Hi, Matt. Welcome. I'm so excited to chat with you again.
Me too, Kimberly. It feels like May was a long time ago, even though it was a couple months ago.
I know.
But I'm glad that we managed to get back in touch so quickly. It's going to be a lot of fun to reconnect today.
Yeah, me too. And in case anyone doesn't know, Matt and I had the lovely opportunity to meet each other at Ethos Farm in Long Valley, New Jersey, when Matt came to talk about his book, and I was able to be there as a friend of Ethos and sit in on the conversation. And what a conversation it was. The group was so engaged. And Matt, you have such a fun way of talking about your book. You bring a menu and we get to choose which topics we talk about based on the menu. How'd you come up with that idea?
Oh, man. So all the creativity of this project is due to the repressed rage of having to do argumentative propositions for many years for audiences of 8 to 20, right? So getting to write for a broader audience and use a little bit of humor and get a little bit more creative was sort of 20 years in the making. So I was kind of busting at the seams to do something a little bit different, and I think that enthusiasm shows.
Yep.
So the menu idea, obviously it's a book about food systems transformation. It's a book about the centrality of food and in particularly of eating in our everyday lives. And in addition to that, I don't know if your listeners are anything like me, but if they're tuning into a podcast called Did You Bring the Hummus, they're probably somewhat interested in food. And I love the energy. I find it just absolutely edge of my seat, electrifying, of a long lingering dinner, right? With friends and family. And if I had to pick, one of my favorite feelings of anticipation, it's when I'm at a restaurant I've really been looking forward to going to, and the server comes over and places before me some beautifully curated menu, right? With this long list of gorgeous possibilities, many with ingredients I've never even heard of. And my curiosity is piqued and I'm excited about the conversation. And then if your meals are anything like mine, you might get a drink or two into it. And maybe things started off tame, but half an hour to 45 minutes into the meal, there's this spirit of freedom, right? And liberation. And you came in thinking you were a loser, and an hour in, you're like planning your successful Senate campaign. It's just, there's something about the energy of a long lingering dinner that I just love. And so I thought, well, books about the V word tend not to generate a lot of positive energy, right? People
That's
see
true.
the V word even in the subtitle. You'll notice I assiduously resisted the urge, or I should say, my editor forbade the use of the V word in the main title. But you see the V word even in the subtitle, kind of puts people on edge. And so I wanted a way to generate that spirit, right, of the long
Mhm.
lingering dinner in talking about the book. And so crafting a little menu with some fun, curious little descriptions of the things that, and then each of the little descriptions, each of the little sort of dishes, as it were, triggers a short reading. And then those little readings can lead to kind of discovery of and discussion about some of the big ideas in the book. So it
Mhm.
seemed like a more inviting, more exciting, less intimidating way to conjure the energy you want for this discussion, which is anything but the energy of like, look at all this horrendous suffering. You have an obligation to prevent it.
Mhm.
Are you ready? And it's like, no, no, I'm not ready.
Never gonna be ready. I love the description of the meal and how that inspired the menu. Because as you were sharing that, I kind of was putting myself in that same scenario, sitting there, like you said, menu coming, and then all of this like spirited conversation starts happening. And I live for the sound of a restaurant, the
Mm.
clinking of the
Oh, yeah.
the silverware on the plates, the glasses, just
Hmm.
all of those like sounds and people bustling around, picking up your dishes, dropping off dishes, along with it's like this whole like cacophony of this just amazing vibe or something.
Yeah, absolutely. Just being in that energy. And if your meals are anything like mine, I mean, I like a good spirited discussion, but I also like to talk about more food when
Mm.
I'm eating food, right? So there's something so
Yes.
incredibly indulgent and freeing. You're like hand over fist with this, that, and the other thing, while also remembering that time you were here or anticipating that time you're going there. There's just something so festive and
Hmm.
abundant about just the right meal. And it certainly doesn't have to be at a fancy place. Sometimes the best meals like that happen at the holes in the wall,
Hmm.
where they'll let you sit for 4 hours and bring your own wine, right? I mean, I
Yep.
don't mean to suggest it has to be fine dining at all, because
Hmm.
often it's just, yeah, there's like you say, vibe is the perfect word. It's near to impossible to describe, but you know it when you feel it, right? And
Yeah.
you feel it across your whole palette of inner life, right? So
Hmm.
it's a physical feeling, there's intellectual stimulation, there's certainly deep emotions, there's a kind of social energy, right? And
Yeah.
occasionally, I guess if you're hanging around with vegans, there can be a moral energy too. Whether you like it or not, you're gonna
Yep.
end up chatting about those things. So yeah, no, I'm right there with you. It is a vibe, and it's a vibe that I love so much. I couldn't think of a better energy to try to conjure, right, in
Yeah.
getting out there behind this book. If you can make people feel like talking about ideas is like salivating over, right, one
Hmm.
sumptuous course after the next, then you've got a better chance of getting people excited, I think.
Absolutely. And I love this because what we have just described is also based on the quick conversations we've had and me sitting in on your talk. This is how we feel about veganism.
Mm,
That it
mm,
is
mm,
beautiful and connecting and joyful.
mm.
So tell me, how did you get here? Tell me your vegan journey.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So I'm not going to lie. It wasn't always joyful, Kimberly. I have to admit, I'm a philosophy professor. I started with the shame and blame. I started
Hmm.
with the horrific footage of the factory farms. I started with subjecting students to every last indignity you could show, right? Um, to a group of unsuspecting captive people. Um, and, you know, but like all journeys, there's an evolution, and one of the things that's most interesting to me about my vegan journey. I mean, sometimes when people talk about their vegan journey, they'll talk about it as though, right, there's the pre-vegan and the post-vegan.
Mm-hmm.
But what's been so interesting for me is that I feel like the vegan journey itself has been this really profound evolution, right?
Yeah.
Who I was when I first became a vegan, when I first aspired to go vegan, is very different than who I am now. Or I guess I should say, given that I'm a proponent of this kind of metaphor of plural mindedness for thinking about the self, the constellation of parts, right, that makes up my inner life and the relationships between and among them is very different now, right, than it was when I started. And let me say just a little bit more so listeners aren't like, here goes the philosophy professor with a bunch of shit that makes no sense. Like, so when I talk about inner life as inner family, I guess I'm thinking, just to kind of simplify things a bit, like we all know what it's like to feel that there are different parts inside,
Mm-hmm.
right? And with food, this is particularly the case, right? So like your gut wants a burger, your heart wants to nuzzle a cow, and your head is bobbling back and forth between like finding excuses to legitimate your old ways of doing things and trying to find reasons to get motivated to do different. And then sort of your moral part stands there leering at the whole mess, right? And wondering when the rest of the inner family is going to get the resolution to join in. And that inner cacophony or that inner family can sometimes be cacophonous, right? These different parts want different things, and it can be really difficult to sort out what's going on, even though we have the illusion, right, in our day-to-day lives that like we're perfectly rational, right? Or we're motivated by reasons, right?
Right.
Meanwhile, the inner family is doing something real different than, following the arguments where they logically lead. And so because I'm the kind of person who has a pretty loud and boisterous and not always harmonious inner family, my vegan journey began with kind of multiple parts of that inner family getting sort of activated in such a way that the whole family was kind of able to pull together. And there were kind of three big moments. So the emotional part for me was triggered by a relationship with my bulldog. I was not a dog person ever. My wife was a dog person. When we finally left graduate school and were able to live in a place that allowed pets, our own house, she was like, we're getting a dog. You're not a dog person, so you get to pick what kind. And I was like, well, obviously I'm deathly allergic to dogs because, of course, non-dog people are always convinced they're going to die, right?
Yeah.
If the dog gets within 18 inches of them. So I knew I had to have a short-haired, hypoallergenic dog. And I also knew I didn't want to be walking that guy. And so I wanted, a relatively low maintenance couch potato, and a bulldog, right? Fit the bill. At the time, I had no idea how cruel, right?
Mhm.
The breeding standards are for these creatures. But that actually ended up being a big part of the emotional transformation because
Mm.
two things sort of happened. First of all, I couldn't deny that Gus was a person. Gus was his name. And what I don't mean, I'm not being silly here. I don't like dress him up in a tuxedo with like the fake
Right.
hands and the cocktails on the tray or anything
Mhm.
like that. No, no Halloween costumes. Well, maybe once or twice, but not very often. What I mean is he's a canine person, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I'm a philosopher. I study agency. I study beliefs. It was just so clear in looking at him, the
Hmm.
way that he acted, the quality and divergences in our friendship, his attitudes and actions toward other people. Just like me, he loved some people and he didn't want others to cross the threshold of my house, right? And
Yep.
so they're just like some of the human friends and family in my life. So I couldn't deny that he was a person. And this was really kind of unsettling. I had never experienced a member of another species in this kind of irreplaceable, personal way where I had to admit that I loved this creature, and not loved him for a dog or
Yeah.
loved him as a pet, but like I loved this creature,
Yeah.
slept in my bed. I
Mm-hmm.
reorganized my life around his needs. For heaven's sakes, this dog ended up with liposuction, a nose job, right? All the
Yeah.
things you need to do to give a bulldog some semblance, right, of a normal life, given all these terrible traits that are bred into them by people who think of animals more like furniture that looks cute in our home rather
Mm-hmm.
than, right, personal beings with needs and hopes and relationships. So Gus, was a huge part of that. And I started thinking about all those other creatures, right, who
Yeah.
were biologically, the same as Gus. The only differences were sort of my own attitudes toward them. And as a philosopher, that was emotionally weird. It just felt incoherent that here's this dog and I can't fall asleep without him snoring at my feet. But like 10 minutes later, I've got the gristle of a pig's body on my lips.
Yeah.
Like just emotionally, that felt really strange. And so Gus was kind of got the ball rolling for the emotional part of my inner family. And then, roughly the same time, I had a fellow philosopher, Nathan Nobis, a terrific animal rights philosopher, teaches at Morehouse College in Atlanta. He's written a bunch of great stuff on these topics. If any of your listeners want to Google him, super clear writer and really accessible work, highly recommended. But we were at a conference. We were just graduate students at this point, and I was eating a big roast beef sandwich. And he kind of cocked his head to the side and looked at me and said, I thought you were a pacifist. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, what? Right? Like,
Yeah.
what does pacifism have to do with lunch? Like, I come from agriculture on both sides of my family, a generation back. Like, my dad was also a professor, but both my grandparents, were agriculture families. A lot of my extended families in agriculture, grew up eating tons and tons of animal products. Was a high school football player who, like, I used to go to like strip mall steakhouses and get like two steaks and put like fried popcorn shrimp in between and eat it like a sandwich. Like, really gross, not at all behavior that I practice these days. And so these were fighting words from a
Mm-hmm.
fellow philosopher, because philosophers, we don't have fame, we don't have money, we don't have the ear of the general public, or even often the respect of our students. But what we do have is authenticity, right? We do have being who we say we are. We do have, right, striving to live out the values we profess. And so to have a fellow philosopher say, you're a pacifist, but you're engaged in this practice of eating meat, that was an intellectual challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And to make a long story short, that interchange led over a period of, I don't even remember if it's months or years, but, Nathan eventually gave me a whole bunch of materials so that and kind of dared me to teach my own class. And I thought I was going to find 10 knockdown, drag out reasons for him to shut his bunny kissing mouth so I could continue to stuff mine with fennel rubbed pork loin. And then, much to my chagrin, there was no other side, right? Like,
Yeah.
this is one of the few issues I've ever come across as a professional philosopher where, there's nobody out there really saying, yep, there's really good moral reasons to do this, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just like philosophers can't even agree whether middle-sized dry goods like tables and chairs exist, right? Kimberly, it might be that it's all just particles arranged table and chair wise, right? We
Right.
can't agree about whether objects exist, but apparently it's more or less settled that industrial animal agriculture is morally indefensible.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really shocking to me. I was desperate. I was kind of text, or sending emails, trying to find out whether anybody knew where the moral case was, and I found some people who were like, well, here's a pragmatic case, or here's an economic case, or here's why the system will collapse if we don't, or whatever. But
Mm-hmm.
the moral goods just weren't in the offing. And that was a really terrifying prospect for a person who has authenticity and authenticity only. And here I am standing in front of my students saying things like, be the change you want to see in the world and live out your values and this sort of
Mm-hmm.
thing. And meanwhile, it started to feel like there was this glaring intellectual disparity. And so the emotional incoherence piece, the intellectual confusion piece, and then the last big event was kind of the social piece. And, I love to eat. Rewind 10 minutes into this podcast and you will recall, right? And so I just thought, oh man, I was begging my wife at the time, let's just do the humanely raised thing, and she was kind of like, no, I think we should take this challenge on. You probably want to err on the side of being too conservative while you're teaching this class, right? It's like, why don't we just sort of do this experiment and see where it goes? And I was like, why don't we not do that? But we did it. And ultimately what it showed me is, I thought this was going to be a social death sentence, that, we'd be living this life of gelatinous tofu cubes and undercooked cauliflower and, brown rice on the side, no salt, no oil. Right. And much to my shock, like, it was just the most beautiful profusion of difference and loveliness in the history of my culinary life. I mean, all these new cuisines from other countries and cultures that I had never really dabbled in before. I mean, all these colorful ingredients that just sort of jumped off the plate. So much more fiber, so you're feeling much better and your gut health is better. It's just, there were all these things that sort of took me by surprise. It's not only is this not a social death sentence, but it's this exciting opening out into more of what I already loved. And so, Kimberly, it took all three of those things. I think if I had just had the emotional jolt or the intellectual challenge or the sort of social reassurance, just one of those, on its own would not have been enough. It kind of took convincing those three members of my inner family, the intellect, the emotions, and the kind of social, that, hey, not only is this not going to be a lonely, judgmental road into deprivation, but this is going to be this transcendent experience, right? Where we get more of what we want,
right?
Less.
Yeah.
And so, that was kind of, the early part of the journey, those three things coming together. But it took a considerable amount of time to move from what I would call a kind of shame motivated sense of obligation to prevent suffering into something more like, a joy motivated recognition that this expanding animal consciousness, this vision of earthly life as a whole, of which I'm just one small part, this earth healing aspect of things, the way that it aligned my views around worker justice and, agricultural work generally, was just all these abundances that came out of moving slowly but surely away from the attention to suffering that kind of initially got me, concerned, to this kind of, an evolution away from scarcity toward abundance, right? Where instead of a sense of obligation powering my vegan life, suddenly, well, not even suddenly, just gradually over time, it started to feel like, the motivation here was the abundance I was getting. And so it's like going vegan changed for me from a kind of duty to prevent suffering to a desire to create and sustain creaturely flourishing.
Mm-hmm.
And that difference in emphasis just makes life on the ground completely different, right? I
Yeah.
mean, and I think my guess is your listeners will have experienced this, right? Like, you know how some days you get up and you go through the day, and because you're in a dour orientation, every single thing that happens to you is terrible,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
On a different day, the very same cavalcade of events might feel like a series of blessings and curiosities if your orientation is one of joy, right? So
Right.
the difference is not what happens in your life. The difference is your disposition to the happenings.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, the journey from starting as someone who was really concerned to prevent suffering, which I still am,
Yeah.
but to someone who is on fire with this desire to foment creaturely flourishing, when it's the desire that's driving the cart,
Mm-hmm.
somehow I just feel like compassion fatigue is less of a thing. And the struggle, right, to get up in the morning and keep doing this is less of a thing.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, like I think the most interesting part of the journey for me is how going vegan was anything but the toggle switch that I thought it would be when I abstained from my first cheeseburger, right? I mean, I guess
Mm-hmm.
what I was expecting is like instant enlightenment, right? Suddenly I hover 8 inches above the ground, a halo appears.
Mm-hmm.
I never have another craving for any of my favorite foods, right? And that just wasn't the experience at all. Until that pivot happened, until desire replaced obligation as the main engine of the way I was approaching this, it just there was a lot more drudgery, and it's
Yeah.
still hard, right? I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
suspect any number of your listeners have done a little vegan advocacy or maybe a lot of vegan advocacy, and
Right.
it doesn't get easier to face the truth,
Mm-mm.
um, but it gets more joyful even in the difficult times. And that's one of the things I love about joy, right? Joy is really different from happiness. Happiness is more like a transient mood. You
Yeah.
know, joy is sort of there even when the chips are down. It's
Mm-hmm.
more like an orientation to life
Right.
than like a mood that just sort of changes with the weather. And that for me was a real eye opener that I didn't see coming 20 whatever years ago when I first flipped the switch.
Yeah. And,
Was that the longest answer ever given on this pod? I'm so
not
sorry,
even
listeners. I
close.
didn't even take a breath.
Not even close. Uh,
Okay.
it's so great to come at it from this perspective and to have that shift from the scarcity, from focusing on the suffering or being like, I don't want to be involved in the suffering, to that joyfulness, that, like you said, the creaturely flourishing. Because we do that, we get to show people how amazing and beautiful and just expansive being vegan is. And we're still doing the things that prevent suffering or show the world we don't want this. There are people out there that want this to stop. So we're still sending the message, but we're doing it from a place that shows people, oh, I can be happy or, full of life and excited
Mhm.
about things
Yes,
while making this change. And so I think we have a better chance of inspiring others to see it as
100%.
something that they can do versus, like you said, this drudgery, this heaviness that kind of just rules your life and makes you feel bad.
100%. I mean, that was one of the most beautiful things that this transition from obligation to joy manifested in my journey was, and I think this is honestly like one of the hardest things about going vegan is managing the feeling of being surrounded by a world of really good people who you love a bunch,
Yep.
who don't share your level of concern or
Yeah.
passion, right? And
Hmm.
the vegan psychologist Claire Mann has coined this term vistopia, right? Sort of like dystopia with a V, right?
Hmm.
The sort of the terrible feeling of being alone with this passion
Yeah.
for transformation, and sort of feeling like a stranger even among your very own, right?
Hmm.
And what I love about this sort of joy oriented approach is that things just feel a lot better when judgment is no longer on the table, right? When you start to look at people not so much as like non-vegans, right? But as folks who, just like you, are on this journey, right? They probably have all the beliefs they need, all the feelings they need,
Yeah.
all the experiences they need, the relationships with other animals they need to, right, share the same vision of a vegan world. But their experiences haven't brought all those different aspects of who they are into alignment just
Hmm.
yet. And when you take that joyful approach, right, in the book, I talk about this in terms of being a vegan in waiting, right? Like if you can learn to see people, um, they're just like you at a different place on the journey. And so then your job becomes not badgering them into being on the same path that you are,
Hmm.
but patiently caring for them and creating a space of veg curiosity that allows them to be curious, that allows them to fail without being judged, that allows them to try the food and not like it without your being disappointed, that allows them to ask questions that, you asked, but that now seem unsophisticated because, you've been on the journey a while. The transition to joy has just made life so much more wonderful for me because judgment is not the framework,
Hmm.
right? Because this is the thing, right? Is that hurting people hurt people.
Yeah.
So if what motivates you to go vegan is this feeling of shame and self-loathing, that you're a part of this terrible thing, and what it means to go vegan is to try to extract yourself from the tractor beam of horrors, right?
Hmm.
Um, well, of course, if that's the way you look at yourself, well, that's what you're going to project onto the others who are still under the influence of the tractor beam.
Yeah.
It's really ironic and sad, right? Because once you're on the other side, I think if all's going well with your inner family, it might get easier to be patient, right?
Hmm.
Because you recognize what it's like to be on the other side of those really difficult obstacles. And you remember, that journey wasn't a cakewalk for you either.
Right.
And then the trick becomes not proselytizing others or putting pressure on people to be just like you, but to think really carefully about who they are, what they love, what level of friendship do you have with them. Is there the kind of intimacy here where you can challenge each other,
Mhm.
or is it more of an acquaintanceship where you really need to step back and create space and let them come to you, right? I think a joy oriented approach, which comes from a space of abundance and caring rather than scarcity, doesn't
Mhm.
need to force others into a box, right? Or colonize other people's imaginations.
Yeah.
It can sort of stand back and create space. And, love is patient, love is kind, love is not boastful, right? There's all these reasons that this orientation allows for people to find their own way and sort of can bring you alongside people as an ally
Mhm.
or a friend or a coach or a sounding board rather than as, right, a judgmental, right,
Mhm.
patronizing, um, you know uh, force for consternation and anxiety, which is, I think, I know what it was like for me when I first transitioned, into this way of thinking. There was an awful lot of judgment.
Hmm.
And it took me a handful of years plus to kind of move into this different space. So I think the joy orientation is really important for our sanity
Yeah.
because it gives us the breathing space to forgive ourselves, which then empowers us to create breathing space for others. And when you give others breathing space, they can be curious
Hmm.
without risk.
Yeah.
And that's when people's lives change, right? When they're excited enough to take the risk, but safe enough to know that if they fail, they'll find love rather than judgment. That's the sweet spot. And
Yeah.
it takes a little more patience to exist in that space, but it's easier with joy.
Absolutely. Um, you've used the phrase going vegan a bunch of times, and I know that that's a big piece in the book. And it made me think when I first read that about people I've seen in the past kind of trying to make veganism a little more accessible. And they would say things like, honey is vegan because you want to be vegan in your heart and you just haven't found your way there. So it's okay.
Mhm.
And it became like this whole thing. And they were selling shirts that would say things like honey is vegan, milk is vegan. And it was, they were, I don't know what their point was, but it wasn't a smart one. And it made things very confusing. And I think your approach in Hungry Beautiful Animals, where you're talking about this concept of going vegan, that it's a trial and error. Give it a shot, see how it goes for you. And if you're explaining to someone what you're doing because they ask or they see something about you has changed or you're doing things differently, instead of saying, I'm vegan and then eating chicken for dinner
Mhm.
because that's your aspiration,
Mhm.
you're saying, talk about going vegan. I'm going vegan. This is where I'm leading myself to, and I'm
Mhm.
figuring it out for myself.
Mhm.
Tell me, did I capture that right? And what are your feelings behind this?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think you captured really important aspects of it. I would add a couple things. So I think even for a vegan who is, eating plant-based 99.9% of the time, I still think going vegan is a better way to describe the orientation, right? Because I
Mhm.
think the unstated truth of the matter is that if the litmus test is not participating in any way in the suffering of other creatures, no one is a vegan,
Right.
right? And I think that's really important because all of these gradations, is someone a vegan or are they not? And this identity based approach to being vegan just seems to me like the wrong way to think about what it means to aspire to this,
Hmm.
right? So I mean, think about any other context where we're aspiring to something that we know in advance is too big for little old us,
Hmm.
right? I mean, imagine how absurd it would be if the way we thought about what it meant to be a Buddhist is to perfectly instantiate the teachings of the Buddha, right? So maybe, if you wanted to get the drop on a Buddhist who wasn't perfect, you might follow him to their car, right? And then you noticed, oh, a bird dumps a load on their windshield and they get visibly angry and curse the bird, at which point you jump out from behind the bushes and you're like, I see that you're both really, really angry, which indicates, right, this attachment. And I guess you're not a Buddhist after all, right? And it's like, no, guess you don't understand what it means to aspire to a vision
Hmm.
that we know in advance we cannot perfect,
Yeah.
right? So even when somebody, is eating a plant-based diet practically all the time, there's all these other things, ways that we're inadvertently, willfully, or inadvertently participating in suffering. Right? We're probably driving our cars and killing insects that we know increasingly are, much more complex lives than
Mm-hmm.
we initially thought, and we have all sorts of products that maybe we didn't realize that particular ingredient was tested on animals, or maybe we didn't realize, oh, and then we got a shot and oh, it was cultured in albumin. Oh, so it's like, I just think if the authenticity test is the perfect instantiation of the ideal,
Mm.
then nobody's in the club.
Right.
So identity based veganism, where it seems like the metric is, do you perfectly instantiate this cruelty free identity?
Mm-hmm.
If that's the way we think about it, I just think it's sort of, the bar is not only too high, but it's just a category mistake, right? That's not the kind of thing that's possible
Mm-hmm.
for creatures like us. The better way to think of it, I think, is that we have this aspiration. I think that it's ultimately an aspiration to open and sustain spaces for creaturely flourishing. And that's what motivates us to prevent suffering, because obviously suffering is not flourishing. But
Mm-hmm.
the motivation to prevent suffering is grounded in this vision of a world where everyone who can flourish has a solid shot at it, right?
Yeah.
And it's able to sort of embody a life worthy of the dignity that is there. And so that's what I mean when I say going vegan, right? It's like there's this beautiful vision of a world where all creatures who can flourish do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's this imperfect person who's implicated in all these incredibly complicated systems, doing the very best they can in keeping with their talents and gifts, but always, always, always already compromised in at least some ways. Now, there
Mm-hmm.
might be a few pillar saints out there who somehow manage to, live on an island eating garlic and fruit or something, right, where nothing is ever harmed. But again, if that's where we place the bar, I don't. Let's put it this way, Kimberly: the numbers fall below 1 to 4%, if that's what we mean
Yeah.
um, by vegan. So I say, well, let's think about this the way we think of trying to be a Christ follower, or trying to be a Buddhist, or trying to be a good parent, right? Messing up doesn't mean we don't embrace that vision. Oftentimes, our mistakes turn out to be like these pivotal junctures where we learn more and
Mm-hmm.
figure out how to go again better.
Yeah.
So, like, if we go with the identity model, we're always sort of 1 weak moment away from not being a vegan, which is a silly way, right, to think about this. But if we go with the aspirational model, then we're on a journey. We've got this vision. We're dialing our talents and gifts into the purpose of trying to get as close to that vision as we reasonably can. But we know in advance that perfection isn't the goal,
Mm-hmm.
and really can't be,
Yeah.
because different people's circumstances, it seems to me, create different inflections on the ideal. And so we might have a shared vision, but the way we live that out is going to be different. I mean, am I more vegan because I'm a philosophy professor who writes about going vegan? I don't think so, right? But once you start trying to weigh, right, who's the
Yeah.
uber, I don't know. To me, it just makes a lot more sense to say there's this shared vision. We're committed to creaturely flourishing, to opening those spaces whenever and wherever we can to the best of our ability. And anyone who's interested, even a little bit, in bringing that vision into their daily lives can claim, right, being on
Mm-hmm.
the way.
Yeah.
Is it confusing? Well, it might be, but I think it's also confusing when people who claim to have their main motives grounded in compassion are like judgmental jerks, right? To people who aren't in exactly the same place they are.
Mhm.
Or when, people who are supposedly, on fire for worker justice, act like it's possible for big swaths of people to just sort of abandon the one
Mhm.
and only means at their disposal for sending money home, right?
Yeah.
The world is complicated, and I'd rather focus on what people are doing in love with that vision
Mhm.
rather than what they're not doing yet, or what they're not doing well, or what they're falling short on.
Yeah. I think too, for me, every day my goal is to not consume animals, to not use animals in any way that, I can control. But I'm always coming at it from a perspective of there's more to learn. There's things I don't know that how we use animals and I'm not yet aware. And also having that perspective has deepened my experience. And
Mm.
I've realized this. I'll use a specific example of spiders. When I was a child, I was terrified of them.
Mm.
And I would throw a shoe and then call my dad to come clean up the mess. And it upset me, but I was so scared and I didn't know what to do. And then as I started on this journey, I would grab the, glass and the piece of mail and gather up the spider if I could and take them outside. But
Mm.
if they ran away or they fell off the piece of mail, I freaked out and would try to avoid them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the experience that I have is of like a feeling of love and respect
Mm.
that no, I'm not looking to have spiders crawling all over me because it doesn't seem like it would feel. I don't think I'd like that feeling, and I'm not looking to be bitten by bugs. But there is this feeling of respect where I'll if someone is in my home that needs to go back outside, I will lovingly take them up, and like I have this like little bug catcher that has like like a long handle, and
Mm.
it has like a clear plastic around it so I can see them. And so I've had this experience of being able to look in the face of a spider or a cave cricket or and
Mhm.
and feel that I know that they have an interest in their own life.
Absolutely.
And now, like the idea of throwing a shoe at anyone in any shape or size is
Yeah.
so sad to me.
Yeah.
And so yeah, coming from feeling of being open, knowing that there's always going to be more to learn, more to feel, more to understand, it's created that aspect of approach from love too. And it's so much more lovely, really.
I love that. That's the exact word I use to describe. I mean, in the book, getting a lesson about home maintenance from a paper wasp, right? Like the old me would be like, "What's this invader doing coming onto my porch? Time to get the raid," right?
Hmm.
And the something closer to hospitable me, if not the new me, right? That makes it sound like there's this completed finished product, which there isn't, but the something closer to abundant me is curious. Well, I wonder why the paper wasp is here
Mm.
trying to carve out a life. And oh, you know what? It's because I didn't caulk the roof properly. It's
Mm.
because I didn't put up good fences to be a good neighbor. It's because, right. And so it's this, when
Yeah.
you're open, when your response to someone else on your territory is openness to learning more about who they are and why they're there, it's just, yeah, lovely is the word. It's just leavening, right? It's like
Hmm.
there's nothing worse than that disposition where when you see someone, and I do believe that insects are someone,
Me
you
too.
know,
Yeah.
when you see someone and your first instinct is to exterminate them.
Hmm.
I mean, that is a lesson for our moment.
Yeah.
I'm very sad and sorry to say, right? It's like
Hmm.
it is the brink of despair to live the sort of life where your knee-jerk response to difference is the desire to exterminate.
Yeah.
That is an incredibly sad way to inhabit a sentient body, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
The suffering associated with having your first response to difference be a defensive aggression rather than an open curiosity. Um, it's just feels like a poor investment of an incredible opportunity.
Yeah.
And I think yeah, for me, insects have played a key role. Ants around the house, paper wasps, um, you know, um, learning about the relationships between aphids and the leaves of my cherry tree and the ants trying to get the sugars out so they can eat the aphid. I mean, it's just all these things, right, that
Yeah.
I was never sensitive to before. Or if I was sensitive, it was always on the defense.
Mhm.
Spray, 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 rip out, rip out, rip out, stamp out, versus now this kind of delightful curiosity. And, there are genuine conflicts of interest sometimes. I don't mean to suggest that, like, Kimberly, there's like paper wasp nests all over my home with my children frolicking among the
Right.
paper wasps. Like, no, you gotta find a way to encourage them to go somewhere else. But sometimes that's as simple as caulking, the roof, or putting some peppermint oil along
Hmm.
the edge, or sprinkling some paprika in the places. And the way that you can find those lower impact, kinder solutions is edifying in its own way, because you have to pay attention.
Yeah.
You have to follow them back to the place in the window that they're coming
Hmm.
in. You have to observe what it is about the world that is driving them to that place.
Yeah.
And man, is that a wonderful kind of attention, right?
Yeah.
It becomes almost impossible when you're curious about somebody to hate them.
Yes.
Oh, it's just curiosity, it draws you nearer. It creates a kind of energy that, at least for me, is inherently protective of dignity, in a way that, yeah, the defensive response is just kind of up go the walls, and then anything is possible, right? And
Yeah.
that's how we get to this place where extermination of the people we don't agree with, or of the people we don't like, whether it's figurative or, God forbid, literal. I mean, I think that's how we get there. And so going vegan is also a way to practice this disposition toward the world that can allow our first impulse to difference to be delighted curiosity, or if not delighted curiosity, at least guarded interest,
Hmm.
right? Sometimes it makes sense to be a little bit guarded,
Yeah.
right? But being a little bit guarded is really different than being defensive and aggressive,
Yeah.
right? And I think, guarded interest and delightful curiosity are two things I've had a whole lot more of, and defensiveness is something I've had a whole lot less of, as I move farther down this path. And it just
Hmm.
does, like you say, it makes life lovely.
Yeah.
It turns things that used to be terrifying into things that just provide texture and interest and beauty, uh,
Hmm.
unanticipated ways. And so that the everyday becomes full of mystery
Yeah.
and excitement. It really is lovely. That's the perfect word.
I I could talk to you all night long, but nobody wants a 4-hour podcast, right?
No, heavens, especially not with a philosophy professor. I think we hit the 16-minute limit like 44 minutes ago.
Not at all. And for me, this is such a joy because not only do I think the world of you, but I studied philosophy in college as well. So I'm a philosopher in my own way, and
Mm.
having these conversations where we're really digging into how we are showing up in the world, our values, our morals, and figuring out how to navigate all of that. Oh, it just lights me up so much.
It is. It is. I mean, the most mundane things in life are shot through with electrifying mysteries.
Yeah.
That's, I think, my favorite thing about philosophy, the love of wisdom, the lived pursuit of truth and beauty and goodness, is that the mundane just begins to sparkle
Hmm.
in ways that make life so much more vivid and fun.
Yeah.
Uh, so for me, going vegan is a big joy aggregator, but philosophy really is too. They're a good combination
Hmm.
for kind of building the curiosity muscle and exercising it delightfully. So
Yeah.
I'm glad a lot of people run screaming from philosophers, but I guess the only reason you didn't is because you're one of us.
Yeah. No, other people don't run screaming either. There were many people very engaged during your talk at Ethos.
Fair, fair, fair.
Well, Matt, I've got one more question for you.
All
How does
right.
how does hummus show up in your life?
Oh man, so I have actually done more thinking on this than you might anticipate. I mean, that question was in the prompt, and I had to really sort of dig deep. My relationship with hummus started at the Sultan's Market
Hmm.
on Lincoln in Chicago in the early 90s. Now, I grew up in a very crunchy family, with agriculture and the garden and the farmers markets and things. But for whatever reason, I think I had only ever really had hummus as a condiment in a sandwich.
Hmm.
Like I had never really discovered hummus in all its glory until at Sultan's Market, somebody said, "This is the best hummus that you will ever have. You've got to not just get it on your sandwich, but you've got to get a side of it." And I was like, really? Like, okay. But it was the first place where it wasn't like, I think until Sultan's Market, I had only ever had the hummus that was kind of like in the little plastic tub, that you would not serve to your friend from
Yeah.
Lebanon or Israel, right? It's like you might get it out of a machine when you're really, really desperate, but it really doesn't show forth the beauty of hummus in the way that you want it to. And so at Sultan's Market, right, it was exciting hummus. They put
Mm.
the little divot in the top, they
Yeah.
poured the special olive oil on, they sprinkled the spices on the top. There was some parsley or whatever, on the top of it, and it was clearly not a condiment, right?
Yeah.
It was an exciting presentation. It had texture. It had a couple of chickpeas around the
Nice.
top, and they had been roasted.
Ah.
I mean, I remember just spooning it, right? Like
Hmm.
when the pita ran out, I just started eating it like
Yep.
ice cream. And, later on, I realized tahini is an amazing superfood, but it's also a really rich food. So that, uh, you know, I, I don't think I've ever eaten quite that much again. But real hummus made a big first impression. And I've had a few, amazing times since then. I have a friend who comes from a Jordanian background and makes the most ridiculous
Hmm.
hummus platters with all the different things to dip it in, and all the flatbread and all, just mind blowing. And I always choose the hummus over the baba.
Me too.
I like it, but in my experience, eggplant isn't as consistently delicious from eggplant to eggplant as
Agreed.
chickpeas are consistently delicious from chickpea to chickpea. So I've had a few bitter experiences, even with well-made baba ganoush, and hummus never really disappoints me. And I won't lie, I mean, I'll eat it from the little applesauce containers too. Like, I really, really enjoy it. It's never had I guess I try not to be a stereotypical vegan too often, but I will say I consume insane amounts of tofu and hummus, right? And like, I'm very invested in this. We have a favorite brand of tofu that I used to drive across the state of Michigan one month to get 30 tubs of it and then bring back across the state because they weren't distributing it on the west side of the state. So I'm serious about some of these stereotypical vegan foods, and tofu and hummus are probably 1 and 2 up there. So yeah, long and storied history with hummus, dating back to probably, I can't remember the exact date, but it was while I was still in high school. So probably 1990-ish. Dating myself now.
That's awesome. And I'm so jealous because I didn't get to experience hummus until I was in my late 20s.
Oh, wow.
I know. And I was a vegetarian.
I mean, it obviously made a big impression.
Oh, it did. It definitely did. And like, I went vegetarian when I was almost 21. So it's not like I didn't start eating this way until I was in my late 20s. But for some reason, hummus just didn't show up in my life until about then. And then I was like, where have you been all of my life?
I'm going to create a podcast about you.
That's right. I mean, how else? What a better way to honor hummus, right? Matt, thank you so much for joining me tonight. This was so wonderful.
It really was. Lovely is the perfect word. Enjoyed every minute of it. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Welcome back. What a joy this conversation was. I am so glad to know Matt and to have spent this time with him. To connect with Matt, you can find him in 2 places. His book website, hungrybeautifulanimals.com, and his personal website, matthewchaltman.weebly.com. You can also follow him on Instagram at hungrybeautifulanimals, and you'll find the link to his LinkedIn in the show notes. I hope you found this episode helpful and inspiring. Please subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you're loving it, please give Did You Bring the Hummus a 5-star rating and leave a review. It's an easy way to keep supporting the show. Be sure to share these episodes with your friends. If you're finding something good here, they will too. If you're a vegan or know a vegan who would be a great fit for the podcast, follow the Be a Guest link in the show notes. Fill out the quiz and I'll be in touch. Get on my mailing list and stay up to date on all things Did You Bring the Hummus? Get more info on how you can sign up for a meditation, one of my programs, or to support the podcast via the links in the show notes. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram at Did You Bring the Hummus, and visit my website, didyouBringTheHummus.com, for more information about me, updates on what I'm working on, new podcast episodes, and all things vegan. Finally, I would love to hear from you. What do you need help with? Is there a topic you want to hear covered on a future episode? DM me on Instagram or send me an email at info@didyouBringTheHummus.com. Thanks for listening.